What do we want the economy to do? That's the starting point for our new series called Fixing Our Economy, because until we know what we want the economy to do, we can't work out how to fix it. Welcome to Bonkers Economics and our new series Fixing Our Economy. Now, Bonkers Economics is called Bonkers Economics because so much of what is happening in the economy appears to be completely bonkers. It just doesn't seem to be operating in a way which meets the needs of ordinary people. It doesn't seem to operate in the general public interest. But what is that interest? What do we want the economy to do? What do we expect it to do? And we may all have different answers to that question. Because for some people, it could be a matter of driving along the road and hitting a pothole and thinking, how come we can't fix the potholes in our country's roads? I mean, they are really, really bad. Or it could be that you're on a waiting list for hospital, you've got some serious illness, it's not being fixed, or some long-term chronic condition. It could be that you have children in school, they have unmet learning needs and they're not being attended to because the resources are not there. It could be housing. For many people, it will be housing. Even those on the housing ladder are paying exorbitant costs to be on the housing ladder. And for many people who are renting, well, renting is incredibly expensive and it's taking a big, big part of their income. So that's a big issue for them. And for those who can't afford to rent, that's even a worse situation. So that's not really working either for many people. And then poverty is rising in our country. Food banks are growing because people can't afford the basics to eat. They can't afford to feed their children. And then there's water and sewage in our streams and rivers and seas. Well, what's that all about? These companies are making huge profits, but no one's investing enough money in our water system. The justice system appears to be on its last legs. There are 80,000 people waiting for hearings in the Crown Court, and that means there are people who are victims of those situations who are not getting justice. And then there's even fundamental things like chronic illness, which is rising, and life expectancy for the least well-off in the country is actually falling for the first time in many, many, many years. So these are serious concerns, particularly bearing in mind that we are one of the richest countries in the world, on paper at least. So something fundamentally doesn't add up. And that's what we mean by something being broken. It doesn't add up. The sums don't add up. It doesn't make any sort of sense. So finding out what doesn't add up and making it add up, that's the purpose of this video series. But before we get too far into that and into diagnosing the issues, I think we need to start with some definitions. And one of those is, well, what is the economy? And the answer is, well, the economy is the realm of economic activity. And that's the realm in which we produce stuff that we want. We are producers and we are consumers. And the economic activity involves creating the stuff that we want to consume fundamentally. So that's about creating wealth in our lives. And we can define the economy, therefore, as the realm in which we produce wealth, and wealth we can define as that which sustains and improves the quality of our lives. So it keeps us alive, fundamentally. Wealth keeps us alive. It's the basics, it's food and housing and that sort of thing, and it's also things that we don't absolutely need, but we really want. So wealth keeps us alive, and having kept us alive, it then makes our lives better. And that's the starting point for all of this. And wealth is nothing beyond that. And once we get into other issues around that, then we just start to confuse things. So the economy is all about producing the stuff that people want and need in their lives. And the name for that stuff is wealth. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that, fundamentally. As soon as we start introducing issues like money and markets and finance and pricing and taxation and banking, well, they're just bit part players in all of this. They're not fundamental to the production and the consumption of wealth. They may help it, they may hinder it, but they're not crucial to it. They have walk-on parts, they have a role to play, but they're not central to the production of wealth in the economy. And to get a bit of a picture of that, let's look at this image over here, which you may be able to see has the word economics running down through the middle there. And it includes words like make, which have to do with production in the conventional sense, but also care, caring for ourselves and others, which is a crucial point of value. And then produce, well, that's something else to do with creating stuff that we want and need. Learning, well, improving ourselves, teaching our children, whole process of learning is extremely productive and creative in our lives. And then home, well, home and hearth, that's really crucial. Our sense of security, our sense that we have a home, our family, those things bring real wealth into our lives. They're really important. And then relationships, well, they're absolutely critical. Our lives can't be sustained without relationships. Good relationships are really important and they bring real value into our lives, as I say. And then society, well, society is the framing in which our relationships become possible and the framing in which the production of wealth becomes possible. Without some sort of social unit in which we can operate, then the whole thing doesn't really work. So that's just a selection of ideas around the word economics. There could be many other things we bring into that. But the point is, we can't just focus on the economy as if it's all about the material things in life. We can't just think about food and housing and iPhones and that sort of stuff, because it's much more complex than that. The economy is the whole process of creating a life which is worth living. And we can dig into that a bit more deeply when we look at this image here, which we've actually seen before, which has the word wealth running through it here. And here we've got similar concepts, but the key word here is value. And we can put an S on that and say values, because living according to our values is a key part of what makes our lives worth living. And our values involve our home, the hearth there. We've got the word earth, which has to do with obviously the environment, among other things. We've got heart, which embraces our relationships. We've even got the word art in there, which talks about culture. And then we've got well-being, which runs through here, because that's a really important way of capturing what wealth means. Well-being, it embraces everything from our health to our sense of happiness and our connections and our relationships and whether we've got enough to live on. The whole package, if you like, is in there in that word well-being, if we can only look for it. And then at the bottom, we've got trust and hope. And those are really, really important concepts of value. They are important values to have, because without trust, we can't really have relationships. We can't produce stuff in the economy, or at least we can produce it much less effectively if we're constantly watching our back, looking to see if we're being ripped off, looking to see if our collaborators are working with us or against us, all that sort of thing. That really destroys wealth production in the economy if we don't have trust. And if we don't have hope, that things can get better, then that makes it very hard too, because often our situation is not ideal, and it is the hope that things can improve that motivates us to produce wealth in our lives. So those two images together, they give us a really strong sense of how the economy is not really just about bits and pieces. It's not really just about food and drink and that sort of thing. It's much more, as I say, about the whole package of what it is to live a good life. So the economy is a much broader concept than we might at first imagine. But we still don't know exactly what people want from that. And we can ask them and we can do opinion polls and that sort of thing. But another really good way of finding out what people expect or want the economy to do is to look at how people actually live their lives. And that is what this image here does. Because this is an average over the whole population of the UK taken by the Office for National Statistics about how people actually use their time in their lives. And what we have here is, well, the green bit is unpaid work. And then the orange bit is paid work, which you can see is actually slightly smaller. And then the yellow bit is sort of self-care. That would be things like washing and looking after ourselves and eating meals and that sort of thing. And then the pink bit here, that is leisure activities. That's time not allocated to anything else particularly. And then the big blue section here, well, that is sleep. Now, obviously, that's an average. It's not going to apply to everybody. Some people will have much more in this paid work segment here, and some people will have nothing at all because they're retired. So it's very much an average, but nonetheless, it's a very good picture of how the entire population is using their time and how they are adding, therefore, value to their lives in their day, because that's what we all do. We use our time insofar as we can to improve the quality of our lives. And so this unpaid work section here, well, that includes a huge amount of activity like commuting and driving and cooking and educating, looking after children, stuff like that, DIY, gardening. But then there's a big sort of overlap between that and the leisure time here, because many activities which we might think of as unpaid work are also fun to do. And that takes us into a whole new area, because of course, when we're talking about leisure, we're not necessarily thinking that we're creating wealth by doing that. We're not necessarily thinking that our leisure time is about wealth creation, but that's because we're not thinking straight, because we ought to be, because absolutely what it is, our leisure time is about creating wealth in our lives. And that takes us into a whole new complication, if you like, about this question of consumption and production, because we think about ourselves as being consumers of something that somebody else produces. So we go to the bakery and we buy a loaf of bread, and that's been produced by a baker, and so he's the producer or she's the producer, and we're the consumer, and it's sort of as simple as that, and we pay some money and we buy some bread. But what happens in this category here, or actually strictly speaking in this category here of unpaid work, what happens if we make our own bread? What happens if we get the ingredients together and we go into our kitchen and we make a loaf of bread and we knead it and we enjoy that process? What happens if we find the entire process of bread making really, really good fun? Well, then it's interesting because we're producing a product that is going to keep us alive, it's going to sustain us, but the activity of producing it is also improving the quality of our lives. It's also, we're enjoying it. We're doing it for fun. We're doing it because we want to. So the activity, the productive activity, is also producing an outcome, which is pleasure, as well as bread. So we are improving the quality of our lives in two ways, one with the bread that we eat and one with the activity of making the bread. And that just shows that quite often consumption and production are all wrapped up in a single act. So as soon as we get reductive about this and we start saying, well, the economy is only really this little orange bit here, the paid work bit, and nothing else really counts, well, then we're missing more than 3/4 of what's important in our lives. And we can get a picture of that by looking at this enormous blue section here, which is all about sleep. Because sleep, you would think, well, how come that's an economic activity? I mean, you wouldn't think of that as an economic activity, except that it really has value. So if we don't get good sleep, we don't feel good. If we do get good sleep, we feel good. So sleep has real value, and getting a good night's sleep is an economic good. And we know that people who have to work 3 jobs and get up early in the morning and go to bed late at night and don't have time to relax and don't have time to get a good night's sleep, the quality of their lives is not as good. So in general terms, we can say sleep is an economic good. And we need to recognize that when we sleep, we are both the producer and the consumer of that thing. It doesn't make sense to talk about us buying into the product of somebody else. Money has got absolutely nothing to do with it. And that is true for most of this picture. Most of this image is not about money. It's about what we do for ourselves. And so it's really important to understand that the economy is not about somebody else doing something for us that we buy into. It's about what we do for ourselves. And that's true across the entire piece. The economy works at its best for us when we can produce wealth in our own lives. So what can we take from this? Well, first of all, consumption is not necessarily a passive activity. Human beings are really, really good when they have the opportunity of creating wealth in their own lives, both as consumers and producers. So that distinction between production and consumption that economists are so fond of, and that sort of balance of supply and demand, that's really a big distraction from the reality of the economy, which is how we produce wealth for ourselves. And so an important or much more important distinction would not be production versus consumption or supply versus demand, but what is life enhancing, the activities that improve and enhance our lives, and what is destructive of the quality of our lives, what makes our lives worse. So that brings us into the area of paid work, which, as we said, was quite a small part on average of the total amount of time that we spend. Now, we know that many people enjoy their paid work. It's possibly possible to have a really enjoyable paid job, and people do, and they bring value to their job in terms of what they do, and they see the value of it in terms of the outcomes that it achieves, whether they're making something that people want or providing a service that really, really helps people, improves the quality of people's lives, or whatever it might be. And many, many other people are in jobs that don't appear to do that. There are many, many jobs where there's no real beneficial outcome, or there may be a beneficial outcome for one group of people, but that just means a bad outcome for another group of people. So that's not really as satisfying. And if the employment situation, if the terms and conditions, if the work environment is not a healthy one, then that also can be very damaging in terms of people's experience of the work. And there's no joy to be derived from it, no pleasure to be derived from it. And we can say that that sort of work is life unenhancing, if you like. It's destructive of the quality of life rather than improving the quality of life. So this all takes us back to the same point, which is the economy is about creating wealth in our lives. And that wealth is created not through some mechanistic process of drudgery over here, allowing some nice times over here while we consume the product of our drudgery, if you like, but as a package of activity where the production and the consumption come together to produce something which we really want, to produce a life that we want, to produce conditions for life in which we feel contentment, in which we find well-being, in which in general we are satisfied, and we are satisfied on behalf of ourselves and our families and our communities. So that's the sort of place we want to get to with this, without even talking about money and all those other sorts of things. That sort of takes us a little bit towards the question, what do we want the economy to do? Because I think what we all want is to have a good quality of life. We all want to enjoy our lives. We all want the economy to work for us so that we can produce the wealth in our lives that we want, because that's the most effective and satisfying way of doing things. So that might be a good place to stop, but I have promised earlier that we would be providing some solutions in this video series, and it might be a bit early to start talking about solutions to these massive economic problems that we have, but I think we can sort of begin to identify one here, which is that what we want the government to do is to identify what it is that we want the economy to do, because if the government understands that our objective in the economy is not just to grow some arbitrary number like GDP, but our objective is to fundamentally allow people to create the wealth for themselves, which will improve and sustain the quality of their lives, then that would be a really big step forward. And for the government to do that, there are some fairly simple things that it could change. And the biggest thing and the simplest thing in many ways it could change is the way that it measures the economy. Now, we don't have time, it's not the moment to go into GDP and how it all works. We've all heard of GDP. We may not know exactly what it is, but we know it's a measurement of the economy. And we will be talking about that in future episodes, but I'm here to sort of give you a spoiler alert that GDP is a really, really bad way of measuring the economy in terms that reference people's aspirations and desires and wants. And the people who came up with the idea of GDP back in the day, they never thought it was a measurement of that either. For them, it was a technical thing about the flow of money through the economy and the capacity of the economy in a money sort of way. It didn't say anything about the quality of people's lives fundamentally. So it's been massively abused as a measure, and we need to get rid of it as a measure of success in the economy. And the government could do that more or less at a stroke of a pen if it chose, and it wouldn't cost anything either. So yes, there's a policy proposal that the government could take on board that would make a huge difference. Because as we know, we tend to get what we measure, and if we measure the economy in a way which reflects what people really want in the terms we've been describing, then there's a better chance that government policy will produce that. And one final thing to say, because it's in the news all the time, we're talking about artificial intelligence, AI. It's constantly being sort of talked about as something which is a massive threat to the job market going forward. So it's just worth pointing out that work that people enjoy doing, productive work that people enjoy doing, adds value to their lives. So if AI takes away enjoyable, satisfying work, then it's not creating value. It's not improving the quality of anyone's lives, it's actually destroying value. And that's a really important flag to start waving, because we need to acknowledge the way in which work enhances and improves and makes our lives more enjoyable and more pleasant and more satisfying. And if AI starts to take that away, then as I say, it's destroying value. It's not improving it. And again, we'll come back to that question because AI is not going to go away as a massive topic around the economy. So thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, do please press that like button just underneath, because that really, really helps, and do subscribe for the series if you haven't done so already, because there will be a number of episodes coming along every 2 weeks in the next few months. And please also do check out the website, which contains some information about all the images that I've created around Bonkers Economics. And finally, if you want to buy postcards of the images in Bonkers Economics, well, you can do that now on the website, and they do make quite good conversation starters, as I've often said. Thanks very much.